Okay, well, I am here with Dr. Jennifer Dilts. Jennifer Dilts is a physician at Children's Mercy Hospital. She is a member of our church. She is a leader in our church. She is the chair of the Leadership Development Committee. She is also a member of our Reopening the Church Building Task Force, who has been working on all things related to COVID-19 and our response to COVID-19 and what that means for us as a church right now. We've said from the beginning that we wanted to do a good job loving our neighbors as ourselves, and and so we wanted to be really thoughtful about our response to COVID-19. And we put together this task force of church leaders, medical professionals, law enforcement, civilian military personnel, city leaders, government leaders, and you all have been working together with us on this. Is there anything that you would like to say about the work of the committee and what you all have been doing together right now?
Yeah, it has been work that's certainly required a lot of thought, and it's been hard because we miss being together physically, just like we know everyone else in our church does. And so what we have really tried to do and continue to do is really look at the expert guidelines and all of the data that we have to make smart decisions and make the best decisions we have. So we look at the CDC guidelines, the Clay County Health Department guidelines, and then all of the national COVID data in addition to Missouri, Kansas City, and Clay County specifically as far as their COVID data.
That's good. That's good. And so we as a church, this can be really confusing because every state and county in the country have phases and steps, and everybody has their own phases and steps, and you never know if you're in step with everybody else. But we have been in phase one of our plan, and there are updates of our plan. In fact, an update of where we are in our own response plan is coming out this week. We have been in phase one, but we are now, at the recommendation of the task force, officially in phase two. So would you say a little bit about, now the report is more extensive, but a little bit briefly about what that means for us now, what we can do now as a church that we couldn't do before we moved into phase two?
Sure. So the biggest difference in phase two is that we are now allowing groups up to 50 people. So that would be small groups within our church, community groups, and other types of groups to meet outside. We know that because of improved air circulation, there's a lot less risk of transmitting COVID to each other if we meet outside. And so these outdoor gatherings can happen on the church grounds, or they can happen in people's backyards and driveways. And we still recommend 6 feet of physical distancing. And we recommend that if you'd like to meet on the church grounds, that you call and make those arrangements ahead of time with the church so that we can make arrangements for the bathrooms to be cleaned both before and after. And we do recommend too that if someone comes into the church or into someone's home to use the restroom, that it's just one person at a time, again, just trying to minimize risk.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And I think a big question, the pressing question that some people will have is, why are we not now doing in-person worship services? There are other churches, even in our city, who have just started having some kind of in-person worship service. We're continuing to do that online. So why is it, as a task force member, as you all have wrestled through this, that we're not having in-person worship services right now?
Right, that's a great question. And when I look at deciding what feels safe or good to do at this point, I think it really comes down to looking at the risks and weighing those against the benefits. And sometimes as a church, it may make sense to be one of the first groups doing something. But I think in this particular case, and we think as a task force, that it makes sense to hang back and to really watch and learn from the churches in our community that have started meeting in person and to see how that goes for them. One thing we know is that COVID cases are increasing in our community, both in the Kansas City area and specifically in Clay County. The numbers have been up over the last few weeks. And some of that may be due to increased testing, but because of other reasons, we know that we definitely can't say that all of the increase in COVID is due to increased testing. We've been testing kids at Children's Mercy for the last few months before MRIs and before procedures, and that's a pretty good representation of our city. And up until a few weeks ago, hardly any of those kids tested positive for COVID, and we've seen a pretty big jump in those kids testing positive over the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. We also know that some of our large hospital systems, like St. Luke's, have seen an increase in the number of people that have been admitted for COVID symptoms that have been admitted to the hospital. We also know that anytime we open things up, it takes probably at least 4 weeks to really see the full effect of that. And that's because it can take 2 weeks to start to develop symptoms after you've been exposed to COVID. And then usually the first week of symptoms is milder than the second week. And so if I were exposed to COVID, I may not feel ill enough to go to get tested or really pay attention to my symptoms for several weeks after that exposure. And so because of those things, we really feel like we want to hold off right now and just kind of see how it's going as we continue to open things up. We also know that if we were to have an outbreak in our church, the way that other churches both in the country and specifically near Kansas City have happened or have had outbreaks, that doesn't just affect us in our church community. The average person who contracts COVID ends up spreading that virus to several other people, and that's typically because they can spread it before they know that they have it. And so if we were to have an outbreak within our church community, we know that would have a much larger effect within the greater community of Liberty and potentially even beyond. And so we feel like the responsible thing to do and the most loving thing that we can do is hold off a little longer and just see how it goes.
Yeah. I really appreciate the work you all are doing. It is, it gives us a greater sense of confidence as we're making decisions to be able to have your feedback and your expertise. So in light of all of that, I just wonder if you might say a little bit about when we get to the place where we would have an in-person worship offering. And right now there's a survey out, the congregation is giving us feedback. We'll be working to tabulate those results and just get a sense of if and when folks are ready to do that and how they're ready to do that. When we do have in-person worship offerings, pre-vaccine, if that happens, what would you say about what that might look like? Some of the parameters and guidelines.
Yeah, so the most common things that we've talked about is for sure we would want everyone to wear masks because we know that is the best way that we can protect each other. We would want family groups to sit together, and then if someone is not in your family group, we would like them to be at least 6 feet away from you. Singing is probably not going to be part of our worship initially just because because of increased spread. With that, and then just looking at other things like the things that people touch a lot, like offering plates and communion. We would probably figure out a different way for offering and probably hold off on communion at least initially.
Yeah. So there's a lot to manage there as well in order to keep everyone safe as we do that. And we appreciate the expertise and the guidance on that as well. Is there anything else that you want to say in closing? We wanted to keep this short, and there's a whole lot more that could be said, and we can certainly have a longer conversation for others later, but is there anything else you'd like to say in closing?
I would just reiterate to everyone that's able to go ahead and take the survey. And we appreciate feedback, and we'll continue to make the best decisions that we can.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the work you all are doing. Thank you for lending your mind and your voice to this work. And hopefully everybody will read that report when it comes out and take that survey, and we'll continue to do our best and to
Yeah,
pray for God's guidance in the midst of it.
absolutely.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks.